today we'll be looking at interview questions, how to answer interview questions, particularly questions that relate to our personal qualities, maybe very close to emotional intelligence area. So today we'll be looking at such questions, how to answer them in an interview setting. Interviews are very important for people to progress in their current role. Sometimes they have to be interviewed for the new role. For people to move to new role, new position, new organization, most times they have to go through the interview process. And we see that this is one of those areas that most people find challenging to deal with. So what we want to do today is to see how we can support people with answering some of the questions that some of us may have found challenging, with the help of an expert in that area. So today I have with me the person of Sabrina Piper, who is a talent acquisition lead. She specializes in recruiting, interviewing, and helping people move into a new role. So she will be helping us in answering some of those questions that some people may have encountered and found challenging in one way or the other. She will be coming from the position of what is expected of a candidate when certain questions are posed. So I want us to listen carefully, gain knowledge, and use it maybe in your next interview to improve your chances of moving upwards in your current role or moving into a new role entirely in a different organization. So Sabrina, I'm glad to have you today. Sabrina, can you think of any of some such questions before maybe I bring out some of the ones I think I've experienced in the past that candidates find interesting or challenging? I know one of the ones they start with in interviews is maybe tell us about yourself. As simple as that may be, it can equally be a very interesting one for some people. So maybe if we go from that one, then we can look at the others. When organizations or when you are being interviewed and you are asked to tell about yourself, what are they expecting? My life history, or tell me how I'm best suited for this position, because it looks like a long response they're expecting, but definitely have a limited time to convey that information. So tell us about yourself. Is there a particular way of answering that, or what are the interviewers expecting to hear?
Thank you so much. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Really great question, and it's one of the key questions that's asked at every single interview, and it's usually the first question that employers would ask at an interview. And usually in situations like that, I would advise those that are attending an interview to prepare. What are your unique selling points? What is it about you that you think this company will desire? So looking at your top 3 skills, or your key strengths, and those are the areas that you'll focus on. But then it's also important that you have done your research, because that would also help you with telling them about yourself. So having a look on the company website and looking at what their values are, the type of things that they do in the community, anything that you can see outside of just the job role itself, and then tie those values in with your own personal values or with things that you do as well. So if they're big on doing charity work, or their corporate and social responsibility is really key in terms of what they do as a company, then talk about volunteering works that you do for charity. So it's about things that you think, yes, they're a unique selling point, but it's also things that you've identified from the company website that they believe in, and things that they do as well. So what is it that they require? Even just things simple as looking at the interviewers, going on their LinkedIn, going on their Facebook, their social media, and just find those common grounds of something that would already they'll think, oh, okay, I like this person because they believe in the same thing as us. Oh, they like the person because we have something that we have in common. But then also focusing on your key skills. what is it that you've learned, what experience that you have that's hard to find anywhere else. So these are the kind of things that I would say that you have to identify prior to going into the interview. Don't try and answer the question once they've asked you. You prep your answers based on what you see on the company website, and then what you think is your unique and your strong selling point, what sets you apart from all the other candidates that would have been applied for this job. So that those would be my top tips for that question.
Right. Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. So a bit of information is required, and in such a question, I think one of the things candidates find a bit challenging is up to what do they want to know? Do I need to tell them everything about me from maybe my early years of maybe school to my early years of career? Because I believe depending on what level here we're talking about, maybe senior roles. So to what extent do I need to go backwards? Because that other part of it, which you have just explained in terms of the company values and things pertaining to the company, maybe, yeah, definitely that can be covered. But then would they really love to know anything about maybe my previous experience and where I have been? Could that be incorporated in such a question?
Yeah, of course, because this is why I mention the things as key as your values, because there's certain things that companies will not know from reading your job description, reading your resume, your CV. They will not. There's certain things they will not know. So there's things that they can look at and be like, okay, this person's got skills in this area, they've got experience in that area, they're qualified in this area. But what are the things that your CV may not tell them? So, for example, what are your values? How hardworking are you? Because you won't gauge that by looking at someone's CV. So, again, it depends on how, and I think knowing how much you would share at that stage and or how far back you would go, it really depends on on the way that the conversation has gone to date. So it's gone to up to that point, because I wouldn't say go back in terms of, oh, okay, when I was a child, these are the kind of things that I like doing. And it really depends on that conversation. And then sometimes, even if you haven't gone as far back in terms of your schooling and that history, then they will prompt you. If that's how far back they want to go, they will prompt you. But I think in terms of what is the information that's relevant to the company now about me, and if it is something that you've done in the past, so if you identify that one of their values, for example, is resilience, and you find out that something happened to you when you were in college or university that showed a level of resilience, then of course you can take it back as far as college and university, because that's relevant to the company currently. So what you're sharing is based, you're sharing information that's relevant to them as a company, and something that's going to show how you would add value, things that will show how will set you apart from them. So if you're just going to tell them about your personal life, and it's not really relevant to the company, to the role, it has no substance to it, then I wouldn't go as far back as school, primary school, whatever it may be, unless there is a tangible reason as to why you're taking it there, as an example to them.
Right, thank you very much. Usually in interviews, the interviewers may have maybe stipulated time they want the interview to last, but that sometimes they don't let you know how much how much time is allocated to each question. I stand corrected on that. You are the expert, but I'm thinking such question, maybe how much time should one give to it, and also one may try to be careful not to answer all the other questions they haven't asked by answering that one. How does that really? How do you create that balance?
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned previously at the beginning is setting out what, just looking at three or four maximum, just of your key unique selling points. Is as long as you know those beforehand, then you can quickly articulate that in the interview. Especially if you've done your research on the company, then your answers will be quick and they will be precise and they will be accurate. People only tend to take long or or ramble when they're unsure or they're nervous or they're unprepared. So if you're very prepared and you've thought this question through and you're tying it into things that the company does and their values and their mission and their vision, you'll be able to answer that question in a very short space of time, but everything that they require to hear from you, you would have answered. So preparation really is key when it comes to that, because an interviewer might not want to spend 10 minutes on you telling them about themselves, because you'll find yourself repeating things and rambling and going on and on and on. But you can actually do that. You can actually get across all your four unique selling points within 2 minutes if you're precise and you're very clear and you were prepared before the interview. So I don't think there is a precise timing of how long that should take. It's more so about the delivery of your answer and how precise and clear it is, and you're not just finding yourself rambling and repeating yourself over and over again.
Thank you. Okay, let's look at some other questions that I believe the candidates have found challenging. One of them is, why did you leave your previous role? Or why do you want to leave your current role? Okay. Well, that will be easy to answer if there was no issue why you are leaving. But if you have maybe you're leaving for because a particular thing, then how will you are you expected to disclose that because I'm put in a certain position?
Yeah, that's it's one of those questions where again people think it's a really easy question, but when employers ask that question, they're asking for a particular reason. So one of the things that they're looking to find out when they ask that question is how dependable are you as a person, and as well as what are the things that would motivate you to leave. So they're already trying to assess what you're like as a person, and if one of the reasons for you leaving is that oh, my role became very tedious and it was the same, there was no variety, I just didn't enjoy it anymore, and they realize that actually an element of the role will be tedious and you'll be doing the same thing repeatedly. They're already thinking, okay, this role's not right for that person, so they ask this role that question to kind of preempt in terms of what's this person like, and then also looking at how dependable you are. If it's just like, okay, yeah, I just got bored in a role so I moved, um again, they will think, okay, this person is not, they're not dependable, there's no stability with them, and they move around a lot. um so and especially like you mentioned about if you're leaving on terms that may not have been great, um I would always say avoid even mentioning that, um, because one thing that you don't want to be seen as doing is that you don't want to seem to be bad mouthing your previous employer or your current employer in any particular way, because that's a put off completely to any former employer. It will put them off completely. Anyone that will sit there and badmouth their current employer, their previous employer, whatever it may be, they're not going to want to employ you. Um, as a person. So one of the things I always say is remain positive. So looking at the good things out of your role, and then just identify little things. Put the way that you felt or what that company may have put you through aside, and then look at things like what was their career progression. So you need to start thinking objectively. Don't think about based on how they've made you feel. So put your feelings to one side and think, okay, what was the career progression like? What was the salary pay like compared to the market? All these other things that could have also, even if the role was great, could have influenced you leaving, and then focus on those points. Or even something as simple as, do you know what, the job wasn't what they sold that they told me that it was going to be. The job, my role changed and it was no longer what I wanted it to be. So you can find things to say instead of just saying, oh, my manager wasn't great, they had no time for me, they didn't value me, like all those kind of things you don't want to be coming across. So looking at other things, um that you would think, if even if things were great, I would still leave on this ground because actually I've now hit my ceiling in my job and there's no movement for me after here because there's not another level up, or and I'm looking to progress but there's no progression path. Like, so start thinking about other things other than that bad experience that you may have had with that employer. Does that answer the question?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Yes. Yeah, I think a lot of employers find it difficult to maybe employ someone who is already speaking negative about their current or past employer because they believe that they will be the next to be criticized. Maybe a few months down the line or a few years down the line, you'll be doing the same thing about them. But I'm equally thinking of a situation where somebody have had a bad manager. Indeed, they have been treated badly in a particular place. Um, Definitely going to talk about that in an interview session doesn't benefit one in any way, really. And I would think it will be something to be avoided, even if that you have every right, you have every good case. But I don't think in an interview session for another organization that you are planning to go into would be a best place to address such issue. What do you think?
No, definitely not. But I think there's spins that you can put on a situation like that. So if you had a bad manager or you had a really bad experience in terms of how you were managed or whatever it may be, you wouldn't say that, but you when you have the opportunity now to go into the interview and ask your questions, you can then ask the manager, like, how do you like to manage people? Like, you could ask questions to see if they have similar traits as your current manager. So I wouldn't openly say, okay, I don't like managers that treat me this way, this way, this way, because my previous manager was like that, and I didn't like the way that they managed me, didn't have time for me, they weren't available. Like, you if that's how you feel, that's fine, but you can then tailor that those thoughts and think, okay, when it's now your turn to ask those questions, and these are the things, these are the issues that you had with your previous manager, you can even say, okay, this is how I like to be managed. This is how I work, and this is what it was like. This is the kind of manager that I think works best with my style of working, and so you highlight that, and then you can then gauge by the response of that hiring manager, the interviewer, etc., if they will have similar traits to the things that you didn't like in your current manager, without you having to say, I didn't like these things. So I think it's more so your responsibility to find out if that new company or that new manager would have the similar traits to what you didn't like in your previous company. But it's never good, especially if you're highlighting, I don't like to be micromanaged, for example, or my manager was micromanagement every minute. He or she would email me, where am I with this, what are you doing? When I'm away from my laptop, I'll get a message to say, why are you away from your laptop? If you start to highlight those things, and this manager that's interviewing you, actually that's how they work, you've already lost the opportunity of the role, although it may not have worked out for you in the long run because you didn't like that from your previous role. But there's certain things that they will think, okay, but that's what I'm like, so we're not going to work together. But you can gauge that by asking questions and then still leave on good grounds. Because again, if that manager has got a certain style, then I always say you don't want to burn bridges with any company. So if you're then negatively speaking about a previous company, and that current manager that was hiring has the same traits as your previous manager, but then they were like, actually, they could have thought, maybe you're not right for this role, but you might be right for another role within the company, automatically they won't recommend you because of how you came across and the things that you said within your interview. So although that person may not have been right for you, there may be other opportunities in that company, but because of the things that you said and how you may have badmouthed your previous employer, they're not looking to hire you.
Thank you. Thank you. Another question I have is regarding salary, pay. Sometimes organizations advertise a position. They give a range of salary from maybe between 60 to 65K, depending on experience, or 100, between 100 and 100. They just give a range. Um, is it better to go for the top or lower one? Or sometimes they just ask you, what salary do you think you deserve? Just give an open-ended question that way, so for you to land. How would one be able to, what's the best position to go in such a question?
Again, a really great question, a really tough question, because I think asking someone what salary they think they deserve, I think automatically people don't know how to answer that question, because it's like, what is it that do you think you deserve? So one of the things that I would advise in a situation like that, I think most people try to go in modestly, and they'll go closer towards like the lower end to the mid end, just because they don't want to think that they're overselling themselves. But actually, research the market. What is the market rate paying for your current skill sets? Those are the kind of things that you'll be looking at. So what's based on your current salary now, and then looking at what exactly are they asking for you to do in the job description. and those people that are doing those duties or those responsibilities, what are they paid? So then when you're answering that question, you're answering the question based on facts, and you're not asking the question, well, I think I deserve this much because I'm really good at my job. You're saying, actually, looking at the market, someone with my skills, my experience, the salary bracket would be this, as you've highlighted, but actually I have these additional qualifications, or I've had an additional few years experience than what you've stated on the job description. So taking all of that into account, I would think I'll be closer to the higher end of that salary range because of this. So I think it's important that you're stating facts and using the current market rate. So it's always important when you're applying for any job to see what the market is offering, because otherwise you're going in blind, and then you think, okay, let me just go for what the middle ground is. But actually, your experience and your skills that you have, you should have actually been at the higher end. And no company is going to tell you that actually you should be at the higher end. They're going to go with whatever you're willing to accept. So it's really important that you do your research. So when you are asking for a salary, it's based on your data and it's based on research, because companies can't really argue with that, because if that's what the market is paying, they're going to have to pay that price for somebody. Although they might turn you down, they'll find out the next person that applies for the role is asking for the exact same salary, because that's what the current market rate looks like. So yeah, doing your research and then not underselling yourself, because as soon as you're going in at a lower salary, they might see in your CV that you have all this experience, all these skills, all these qualifications, and then you're going at a low salary because you don't want to price yourself out, as a lot of people may do. But then that makes the employer think, then maybe this person's not as qualified as we think they are, because if they were as qualified as their CV shows, their salary shouldn't be that low, and it starts to raise red flags on their side as well. So there's a lot of things to think about when you're thinking about what salary is it that is right for this role. What salary are you worth? And it's looking at your skills and your experience, and what is the going rate for someone with your skills and your exact experience.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting. Yeah, for me, I also think that going for the higher rate or higher range, or the top range of that any rate that is given will be a sign of confidence. We give the impression that you believe in yourself, you believe you are qualified for it. So I think for me, I would like to go to the top. A lot of times people may want to start from the lowest one, but I think even if you go to the top and they're interested in you, they can negotiate it. But I've seen candidates that asked for went for the top. In fact, asked for more, because the organization advertised something higher before, and then when she went for the interview, they sort of maybe lowered it. And she said, well, the first interview I saw, the first advert I saw about this was maybe something like this. And then they said no, they changed their mind. But they found her very good. They thought that they needed her. She said, well, she applied because of that previous one she saw. And that was about £10,000 difference. I mean, the yearly intake. Actually, they paid her. They are contracted on the higher level. The amount she was asking for, because now she had gone through the interview. They were willing to make the offer, but she said, "Well, I can't go on this salary because what I saw." Actually, they sent her the offer later, but then on reviewing that, she saw that the salary there was a little bit lower than what she expected. She said, "Well, what I saw before was much higher." Then she negotiated it. What I'm saying in essence is that it requires a level of boldness. Don't think that if you go for that, they may be thinking you are greedy, as long as you can defend it. And if you have gone through the interview already, at that point, they see that maybe you have what they are looking for. Definitely, why not? I would prefer you go for the top and they negotiate it than you going to the lower one. And like Sabrina said, that would be sort of casting some doubt whether you as qualified as they thought you were, or you as good as they thought you are. Yeah, some other questions I've seen is something like if I had to ask your current manager which area or areas you require improvement in, what would they be? What would they be and why? Yeah, that's a very interesting one. This one is more of sort of would that be emotional intelligence now, or sort of self-awareness, really? Okay, let's see. Sabrina, did you get that question?
Yes, no, that's exactly it. You've literally hit the nail on the head. It is an emotional intelligence question. So they want to see how self-aware you are. So that in itself is one of the questions that they tend to ask. And it's usually questions like you said about in terms of what would your current manager say your areas of improvement are, or questions around like what would you say are your weaknesses. So those are the kind of questions that they would ask you to check that you are aware of your development areas, like what where are you lacking, like where are your gaps in your experience, because there's some people that think they're great at everything, but realistically there is some areas in our lives, no matter what it is, and how qualified we are, that we need to improve, and companies want to know that you're actually aware of that. So I think with questions like this, people tend to panic because all they see is the negative side of things. They don't want a possible employer to think that they have any weaknesses or they have any areas to improve. They want to sell themselves as they can do everything and anything. You know, that's what you want to get across in an interview. But I think it's also important for them to know that actually you're aware that there might be some shortfallings in your experience. But it's highlighting, yes, I'm aware of that, but this is what I'm doing to improve that. So there's nothing wrong with saying, okay, if my manager had to say, my manager may say something that my area of improvement, for example, you look at what that is as the negative side of that in terms of what they would say you need to improve at, but then looking at a way that you can then turn that negative into a positive. So thinking about it in the sense of your manager might say, okay, I'm just trying to think of a good example to use. That someone that may spend a lot of time focusing on one particular task just to make sure that they get things completed. So you could be that kind of person that it's like, okay, you have to do a task one at a time, but it's because you want to make sure that everything is perfect. And then if you're spreading your attention across multiple tasks, you feel like your attention to detail may not be as good. So for you, your manager will be like, okay, I need you to improve on that, and then manage more things than once. But then you can give example as that's one of the things that's been highlighted to me. It was made clear to me in my performance review, but actually since I've been aware of that, one of the things that I've been doing is actually taking on more than one project at a time, so I can start growing and developing that area for myself. So then what you're showing is that you're aware of what your improvement areas are, but actually you're also taking active steps to improve that. So think of any like live examples that you have to show the company that you're taking active steps to improve the area that would be highlighted as a weakness. Realistically, that's what they want to see, that you can identify it, you've identified it, but then you're actually, the next step from identifying it is then now the active steps that you're taking. Because most employers, when they're interviewing you, they'll have a scorecard. So and there's different levels based on the answers that you give. So you have like the basic, the what's classed as what's required, and then where you go exceptional, over and above. So if you're answering a question and you just said, okay, this is my this is what I think my manager would say is my improvement area, they might just give you a 2 out of the 5 because you've answered the question. But if you're then saying, this is the area that I know that I need to improve on, and these are the active steps that I've been taking based on taking on more than one project at a time, they're thinking, okay, if that 2 will then go to a 4 out of the 5 because you've now given them live and practical examples. So although you've highlighted that you have a weakness or an area of improvement, but your answer to that question now has bumped up your scores. So it's important that you look at the steps and taking steps to improve that skill. And one of the things that I tend to say to people before even going into an interview is preparing, looking at your at your CV, and then looking at the job description that the company's advertising, and already looking at what are your shortfallings, because they're going to concentrate on these. So if you're already preempting the kind of questions that they're going to ask you, then you'll be prepared when you go into the interview. So you already know there'll be certain areas that they will dig deeper on because they think, okay, you're lacking in this area. But if you're already prepared with things that you've been doing to try and gain that extra knowledge, whether it's you enrolling on external courses, or you've now assigned yourself with a mentor that's helping you build on those leadership skills, or whatever the qualities may be that you need, then you already have something that you can go in and you can answer. So yeah, it's highlighting that you have areas for improvements is definitely not a negative thing. It's actually seen as a really positive thing, because you're very self-aware, and if you're going into a company, going into a role, you need to be self-aware, because you could be going into a project or working within a team, and the task that you're given, you need to be aware, okay, this task may not be my strengths, but what is it that I need to do in order to make this thing work? And it's like, what do I have to go in and pull someone in from another team? So instead of you saying, oh no, I can do all things, and then you try and do something and it fails, it's better for you to be aware that you're shortfalling maybe in this area, so you know you need to go and reach out to someone that has more expertise than you do, and then to ensure that thing then delivers on time and in scope. So self-awareness is very important, and those are the kind of questions that will always be asked at interviews. They're not going to change, because they need to know that you are self-aware.
Absolutely, yeah. Those areas are very, very important to organizations, and the more people know about them and prepare their answers, the better or position, the more advantage they have. It's an interesting one. Yeah, because people are not trained to talk about their weaknesses, really. But from the work we do in this area of emotional intelligence and recruitment of executives, particularly, that's one area that organizations are keen to know, that someone going to the position of leadership is self-aware, and really is the foundation of a lot of other things we talk about in emotional intelligence, empathy, collaboration, influencing people, all those skills that are required for success in organizations and in our time. Self-awareness is their foundation, really. So I can understand why organizations will put a lot of emphasis on that. Another one: why should we hire you over the other candidates we are also interviewing, right? Definitely. Why should we hire you over other candidates that we are also interviewing? Well, how? Definitely, that's why the person came. But how do you put that professionally? Not to say, yeah, well, I'm better than every other person. Is there a better way of presenting that, Sabrina?
Yes, and I think this question ties into the first question that you asked, where it's like, tell me about yourself. And I mentioned having those your 3 or 4 unique selling points, and this is what you'll stress on. Again, looking at the company culture, and I say that now, and I speak about this. You'll hear me talk about values and things a lot. It's because it's a huge focus now in many organizations. People that live and breathe their company values, that is what they're looking for. So it's you getting the interviewer to recognize that there are a lot of traits that you have that the company has, so you have the same beliefs, and not even just, yes, you can do the role, because they know that you can do the role. That's why they're interviewing you. They've seen your CV and they thought, okay, great, this person looks great on paper, I want to interview them. They've already come to that stage, and they've come to that understanding. But it's also, okay, over and above that, what can you do? Like, what is it that you can do? What more can you do for us? So that's when I say you have to, where your research will now be really, really important. So looking at some of the key things in their news, what are the things that they've done recently? Is there anything that you can say, oh yeah, I was checking on your website and I've seen that you guys have recently done this. Do you know what, next time I think this will be a great idea because of my expertise in this area. I think maybe if you did this a little bit differently, you would have generated more, so you're showing that you've done your research, but then also you're showing the company, based on the knowledge that you have, you can come in and add value immediately. And I tend to use that a lot in my interviews. So I do a lot of research on the company and their current processes, procedures, whatever it is that they have. And then I would highlight things that I might say, actually, that wording was great, but actually, if you put it this way, then it would have a different meaning or come across in a different way. So they can see already this person can come in and make some immediate changes and some really great ones as well. But then also looking at coming into the culture and the current structure and the current team. And that's why I mentioned about how important it is to research the interviewers. So once you get that invite via email, LinkedIn, go on LinkedIn. Who are these people? What do they do? What were their previous roles? What companies did they work for before? All these things that you need to do. Then start researching their previous companies. Get as much information as you can, as much background information, because these are the things that you would use going into that interview, because they can see your experience, but it's like, what is it? What else is there about you that they need to buy into? So you're now going to sell yourself based on things that you see that they like to do. So if they like to watch football, let's talk about football. Because even something as simple as common to some little common grounds will then give you a slight advantage. So it's not just about your technical expertise and your experience and your skills, because they know that you already have that, but it's also how much do you understand the company, and do your values match ours? And if they do, give me some live examples of how you would then live our values, or you've done things that you shows that you will continue to live our values because they match what you do in life. And so anything that you do in your family, your community, so all these things are the things that you'll be looking at. So it's looking at the bigger picture, as a whole, and then getting them to buy into you as a person, like not just your experience. It's you as a person, that you're selling yourself as a person. So I think it's really research is, I would say, would be the key thing. Researching as much as possible, and then tailoring yourself, your approach, your answers to the question based on what you know about the company, the interviewers. And then of course you're going to use your experience and your technical skills as well in that interview. That will set you apart, because just by you saying I can do the job, it's not enough, because everyone that's applied, well, you would hope so anyway, or everyone that's got to this interview stage, they can do the job and they know that they can do the job. That's why they're interviewing them. But what is it that goes beyond you doing the job? And that's what you need to work out. Like, what is it beyond the fact that
All right, a common question. Somebody actually this evening, somebody went for an interview and was telling me about it, and so one of the questions they asked was, "How will your friends describe you in 3 words?" Okay, or it could be 1 word. It can be or how you describe yourself, or how your friends will describe you. What are they expecting to hear?
These questions are really great questions, because to be fair, I was actually asked that question recently in one of my most recent interviews, actually. And I'm just thinking about how I answered that question. I think it depends on whose perspective they want to know how they, because obviously how your friends view you or may be slightly different to how your colleagues or your manager may view you. So it depends on whose perspective they're asking you from. But again, the reason that they tend to ask these questions is, again, to see how you are as a person and what your values are. Because the reason people will come to you for certain things, it means because you, for example, I'm the kind of person where a lot of my friends would come to me for advice on life. So it's not just because I work in HR and talent that they'll come to me with advice about their career and that, they'll also just ask me question and advice about life. And it just means that if one of the things that I've realized about myself is that in terms of solving problems and being able to provide solutions to situations is one of the things that I'm really strong at. So that's something that I would then touch on, because as much as it's being able to provide solutions and answers to people from a personal perspective, that's actually a really strong skill to have in the working environment as well. So I tend to share things that I know are great personally, but also they're very transferable into the working environment. So for example, your problem solving skills, like what is it that they would say about you? And then things like reliability. Like, my friends know if they need me to do something, if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. And again, that's a great transferable skill in the working environment. So it's looking at things that, yes, you actually are, this is who you are as a person, so you're not going to make things up. I really never advise you making up things about your character, because eventually it will come out. If you're not reliable and you say you're reliable, they're going to know that you're not reliable at some point, because an unreliable person cannot just be reliable overnight. It's not possible. So I always say be honest, but then looking at things in your personal life that actually will benefit you in the working environment. So being reliable, really good problem solving skills, being able to provide solutions when you need it to your friends, your family, whoever that may be. So it's identifying the things that you're really good at, and your friends, family, and that would say are your strong set of skills. Like, ask people. I tend to ask people, okay, what if you were to describe me? I genuinely ask these questions, so I like to see how people view me. Is it the same way that I view myself? Because I'm very self-aware, so I like to make sure that how I view myself is actually how I come across to others. So I tend to ask these questions anyway. So when a question like that's being asked at interview stage, I already know because I've asked the questions. But then it's also, like I mentioned, just picking those things that will be transferable to the working environment. So it's not just good saying, oh, my friends will say that I'm funny. Okay, great if that's what they think of you, but that doesn't help your employer in any way, you just being funny. So it's again highlighting things that are transferable to the working environment. That's the way that I would say that I would answer that question.
Thank you very much. That's an interesting one, really. Yeah, and I think it's good to maybe leave out whatever you have written in your CV. As we were saying that, I was just remembering a situation where someone said that they're very organized, and when they were asked for a copy of their CV, boy, they have to look everywhere. Still, we're not able to find it. So that would be a very big contradiction to whatever you are presenting. All right, so that's a very challenging one. All right, just in closing, but maybe one or two more questions, and we finish. Something like, tell me about a time in your career where you have made a mistake or failed at something. That's a big one, because the positive things are easier to say, but negative things are also, people are asking of that now in case of how to manage failure and crisis. I think it's one of the things that organizations have introduced newly. Or well, recently I've seen that, because a lot of time, particularly in executive level, people do ask that question now more often because of the recent development you have seen, where things happened unexpectedly, and people whom we thought would have been able in a better position to manage it haven't been used to managing maybe failure or disappointment. So situations like that, how would you present it? Is there a better way of presenting something like that, Sabrina?
Yeah, so as I mentioned previously, it's understanding that these questions don't paint you in a negative light. It's more so what the employer wants to now gauge from this question is, how do you, firstly, before I even get to that second point, firstly, are you aware that you've made mistakes in your career? Because someone that can't identify where they go wrong or where they went wrong, it means that they're prone to do the same thing over and over again, and make the same mistake over and over again because they don't recognize that it's a mistake. And then secondly, when you recognize that you've made a mistake or you failed on a certain task or project or whatever that may be, what did you do to recover? Like, that's what they want to see. Like, did you just say, I'm sorry, and then you left it? Or did you try and do as much as you can to try and recover from that situation? So it's not enough so the way that I would answer that question is not just to say, okay, in my last role, I failed by I missed the deadline on this because I didn't see an email in my inbox. Okay, great. You've identified what the issue is. So what did you do now to manage that, to ensure that those things didn't happen again? So it's always about the recovery and what have you done to adapt yourself to make sure that thing doesn't happen again. Because of course there's things that we do where we we do make mistakes in our career, but it's recognizing that you have made a mistake, but then it's showing them that actually, because of that mistake, I've learned X, Y, and Z. And from learning X, Y, and Z, I've now put an action plan to prevent this thing from happening again. So saying that you've made mistakes is not a negative thing. It shows that you're aware that you made a mistake. And now you've put preventative measures in place to ensure that doesn't happen again. So the way that you answer questions is so key in an interview. So it's not good enough just to highlight this was a mistake that I made and now you've answered the question. You have to expand on the mistake that you made. Did you have to then pull certain people in to try and support you to try and was there even time for you to resolve it? Because there's some things where you've made a mistake, but actually there's time where you can resolve it. So for example, you send an email and there's two Michaels in your workplace, and you've sent the email to the wrong Michael, and that email contains salary information. And one of the things that you can highlight, with the first thing that I did when I recognized that I sent it to the wrong Michael, was I tried to recall the message. So it's not like you realized you sent it and you started panicking and did nothing about it. You took an active step to try and recall the message. And whether Michael had seen it already or not, that's the different situation. But the first thing that you did was you took an active step. And then once Michael if he did see the email and he didn't recall it in time, then what did you do once he had seen the email? Did you make contact with him, apologize for sending such an email, and then ask him to delete it? What were the steps that you took? Who did you highlight? Did you let the security team know? Did you let the person whose data you may have sent across to Michael? Did you make them aware that this has happened? So it's more so about what have you done with that mistake that you made? What did you do to recover from it? That's what they're going to be looking at. It's not the fact that you made a mistake. And I think that people in interviews need to get past the fact of this. They're not looking to trip you up in an interview. They just want to understand how you think and how you work when things don't quite go right. What is it that you do? Because sometimes we're so busy in work, or the environment that you work in is so fast paced that you are prone to miss something. Normally someone that has great attention to detail, you might be having a really busy week, you're working across multiple tasks, and you just miss something. These things do happen, but it's about what do you do when you've missed that thing? What are you doing in those situations? So don't focus on thinking, oh, this employee is trying to work out how bad I am at making mistakes and how regularly I make mistakes. That's not what they're looking at. They're looking at, okay, you can identify that you make mistakes in your career, but then what do you do? How do you recover from that mistake? So yeah, that would be my answer to that question.
Wow, thank you very much. Thank you. The very final question is the one they also ask during interviews. Do you have any question from Ross or for me, depending on how many people are interviewing you? I believe that strong candidates do come up with strong questions too. Sometimes also people don't have any question to ask. So is it better to ask or not to ask? And then to what extent? If you asked a very intelligent question, would that count against you? Particularly the ones they struggle to answer.
I always ask questions. If you don't ask questions, you've already placed yourself in bad light. So you should always go into the interview prepared with questions, prepared. Even if the questions that you ask, we're going to ask are generic at the beginning. But as you're being interviewed and they start telling you things about the company and the culture and the role, at some point questions must be triggered in your mind based on the things that they're sharing with you. So as they're sharing information with you and questions are coming to your mind, jot those down, because I think anyone that goes into an interview and they don't bring any questions, as far as the employer is concerned, you don't care. Because when you care about something, you have questions about it. You want to understand, how does it work, but why do you do things that way? Have you thought about doing things? You have questions that you want to know more when you genuinely care about something. So if you're not asking questions, so the employer, they're like, oh, they must not want this job that much, or they must not be sold on the company that much. But usually my advice is that the questions that you're asking should be questions that you can't just Google. So if it's something that you can just Google and find on Google, or something that you can find on their website, they're not great questions, because those are the questions that everyone's going to be asking. Like if you're going into an interview and you're asking questions, the questions should be things like that only those interviewers can answer. So it's something that's not on the job description, something that's not on their website, that is not on their review page like Glassdoor, anything that you can't see on their social media. So it should be things that you're genuinely not aware of. So one of the key questions that I tend to ask about is how would they, as the employer, measure your success in that role? Because that you can't see that anywhere. Like, so what are my KPIs? How is success being measured? So how do I know in 6 months time that I've achieved what you wanted me to achieve in this role? So those are the kind of questions that I would recommend that you would ask. And then things like, what is it about the company why you joined? What do you like about your role so much? What's the company culture like? If I was to ask 4 employees what they like most about the company, what would those things be? Those are the kind of questions that you would be asking, because it's not anywhere for it to be found, and it's not open on display. But if you're asking questions like, oh, who are your clients? It just shows that you haven't been on their website, because most companies have their clients on their websites. Or who are your competitors? It means that you haven't done enough research, because once you know the industry that the organization works in, you can then Google companies that do similar things to them, and then you can then find their competitors. So asking questions for the sake of asking questions, it's not good enough in an interview. So you're asking things that actually they know that you can only get from them, and that information can come from them and them only. Those are the kind of questions that I would recommend that you ask, like things that you genuinely want to know about the company that you couldn't find anywhere else. Like, what's the tenure of employees? How long do employees stay? Why do they stay? Like, those are the kind of things that you want to be asking. How often do you have pay reviews? Like, what benefits does the company offer? Like, things that you genuinely can't find anywhere else. These are the kind of things that I would then be asking at an interview. But I would always recommend that you have questions, because for me, anyone that comes into an interview that I'm interviewing and they have no questions, more than likely I'm not ready to progress with them, because you haven't even taken time to ask questions. There's no way that I've told you all this information about the company, all this information about the job role, all this information about the team and the dynamics, and then you have nothing to ask. It's impossible. So it means that you don't really want this job. Is it that you just want this job because you need a job, and it's not this actual job that you want, or the company that you actually want to work for? So again, there's red flags that are raised when people don't ask questions. Does that answer the
Wow,
question?
absolutely. Thank you very much. Really, well, I didn't know it has such a great implication. And some people try to play it safe by not asking questions, but as you can see, it's important that you ask questions. There's a saying that you know a wise person by their answer, a smart person by their answer, but you know a wise person by their question. So, really, I think asking question is very important. It shows commitment, it shows interest, it shows passion, enthusiasm. All of those things are things that can be conveyed by your willingness to know more. All right. Thank you very much, Sabrina. Thank you for throwing more light on these questions. For anyone that will be listening to this, definitely there's so much to benefit from it. So, success or failure can be defined by the individual who is involved. But then, if you're talking in a corporate setting, based on what they want to achieve, they can set parameters for defining success or failure. What they want to achieve, their what we call their KPI or objective OKRs. A lot of these things that organizations set to define success or failure, or what they want to achieve, whether they meet that or not. And some of the things we are seeing in the corporate world is now people are not even defining things as such as failure, because people are seeing that, or the idea or the popular view is that that something didn't work out does not necessarily mean it's a failure. It could be that somebody just discovered one way something would not work, so people are more liberal in the definition of failure. Okay, so in that sense, a lot of some organizations don't really class some things as failure. They just call it maybe a learning experience, and add it to as part of their knowledge repertoire, where they can maybe say they have gained more knowledge on how certain things wouldn't work, and they move on from there. So failure in certain places can be defined, but then when we look at the society as a whole, we can have maybe a standard definition of success and or failure. Um, Generally, a lot of people would believe that somebody that have gained a level of education and a certain amount of money, or even without, that's how I'm saying that when you look at the society where people live, people may have that level of definition or way of viewing success or failure. But from the work I do, I believe that individuals should be able to define success for themselves. Right. For me, in defining success, one of the definitions I love very much is the one from L. Nightingale. He says success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. Right. So, um, in that sense, whatever you are doing, that is what you chose to do. You can tell yourself you are a success, or even on your way to what you want to do, what you want to become or be. If you're on that path leading you to that where you're going, you want to go, then he will say, well, one can say he or she is a success. That means a teacher who is a teacher who is a success is a teacher that is teaching because he wants to be a teacher. All right, an Uber driver that wants to be an Uber driver, um, a coach that wants to be a coach, a pilot that wants to be a pilot, and anything really. Doing what you have chosen to do can be maybe a better way of defining success. But success has to be defined by the individual. If you don't have your own definition of success, you may default to the one the society has defined, which may not work for everyone. And Sabrina, thank you very much for the wonderful presentation.
Thank you. Bye.